All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome or welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Kris, and today I'm joined by the lovely Livia J. Elliot, who is the author of The Genesis of Change and Dance with Me, which we're here to talk about today. So I'm going to throw straight over to you, Livia, to introduce yourself and tell us what you're working on and where we can find you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you for having me over. Like I have been following your channel, your Twitter, everything for quite a while, so I'm very happy to be here. And yeah, as you mentioned, I have like two very different series that I published. Records of the Orders with the first book, which is Genesis of Change, and this is Eldritch horror meets political intrigue and some other things. And then we have Dance with Me from Tales of the Bookshelf, which is a dark psychological fairy tale universe. And I also have a podcast and I also write interactive fiction. So, and if anybody wants to find me, I'm Livia J. Elliot almost everywhere: Twitter, X, Substack, Instagram, Blue Sky. Yeah.
It's a smart way to do it. Just have the same name across a platform. We can find you
Everything. Yes.
everywhere. I will have Livia linked down below as well, so you can go ahead and check out the description box down there. Hello, Fernando. Thank you for joining us this evening, or whichever time you are joining us from. In Australia, it is currently in the PM, so the sun has gone down. I'm going to get a little bit more into your interactive fiction a little bit later as we go through the
Yeah.
interview, 'cause I'm very interested in that. But we are here to celebrate Dance With Me, which is currently about halfway through the Kickstarter. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Got a
roughly.
couple of
We have
weeks to
2 more
go.
weeks. Yeah.
2 more weeks to go. All right. And how you found the experience? Can you share with everyone what it's been like for you?
Yeah, I would say it was a roller coaster. That's a
You
summary.
said you started in
So,
September last year, so
yeah, that's true. We started in September, and that was not with the idea. So we already had the idea by September. We had the idea of doing it by July, and then by September we started doing everything. So I completed the novelization. We had that edited. And I started doing the external cover. So this cover that you see on this one, it's made by me. I did all of the internal design, setting up the whole Kickstarter, planning the rewards, the different stretch goals, and then finding the budget, whether we could do it or not, the cost it will have. And it was also a bit daunting in the sense that the Kickstarter is based in Australia and most of the backers are from USA. So I also had to see how can I make them see an amount and not panic because it's in Australian dollars. So yeah, and also coordinating everything because I had to coordinate the additional internal illustrations for the hardback, the audiobook as well, and some of the designs whether I wasn't sure that, for example, the stretch goal that we just hit for the paperback, which is an design printed in the inside of a paperback. I wasn't sure if I was actually going to be able to do it because it's also a design that I did. But then I did it and said like, okay, we can offer that. So it was a lot of trial and error, informing as well because it's the first one that I have run, and I have backed different other ones. But yeah, it's an experience, I will say.
It sounds like it's a huge learning curve as well. You've got to
Yeah.
learn as you go through it, but it is doing quite well. So it funded in 12 minutes, which is really
Yes.
exciting for us. I've got my copy.
I
Like I've got
could.
my copy. I'm ready for it. It looks beautiful.
Thank you.
Uh,
Yeah, but it launched on, I think it was 12, like Cinderella. So 12 p.m. on the evening for Australia. And of course, it was pretty late for me. So, and it was also like strange because I wasn't expecting the Kickstarter to start increasing the numbers live in the admin page and showing me that. And I was just like going insane. And at some point, I just turned to my partner and told him, like, we are almost there. And he just says, look, and we just found it.
did you sleep at all that night, or did you stay
No,
up all night watching that
I think
page?
I, I think I slept like 3 hours and woke up at 6 a.m. to see how it was doing and put up an update. And it turned out that while I was sleeping, we hit another stretch goal. So
Yeah, that's
that
amazing.
was fantastic.
That would
Yeah,
be
that was
so
amazing.
nerve-wracking that first night. Because I'm in Perth, so I'm 2 hours behind you,
Yeah.
and I saw it pop up at like 10 p.m. at night. I saw the reposts happening for a couple of hours. I'm like, oh, she's not sleeping.
Yeah, we
um,
we had a lot of people, and you were part of them on the ARC team, that Reddit, and
yeah,
many of them were at the ready, with skills post and everything. And yeah, we started getting a lot of pings on social. So it was exciting. It was terrifying at the same
of
time.
course, of course.
Yeah.
Many good things are both at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Um, all right. Well, I'm glad it's going well. So let's have a chat about the book itself. Can you
Yeah.
talk to us about Dance with Me and what it's about?
Yeah, sure. So this is a standalone and it's a novella. As you can see, it's pretty thin. And it's a whole allegory about self-worth and learning to live for yourself and not for the satisfaction of others. It's a dark fairy tale because it appeals, yeah, it uses the allegory of enchanted dolls, in this case, a ceramic ballerina that lives atop a music box, to discuss a bit more about power dynamics because she's enchanted by an elf, and the elf is elf size, and he's locked her in a cupboard, and she also lives on her music box. So the allegory builds from there. And within that cupboard, there are other dolls as well, different types. Not all of them are dancers, some of them are just one is a clockmaster, another is a philosopher. And so you have different types of dolls. And as things start to happen to the protagonist, Lyra, she begins to get fractures across the ceramic. And she was used to being perfect, to being glossy and shiny. And as those fractures start to come in, she starts to doubt herself. She starts to doubt why she's dancing. And as that happens, she begins to meet other dolls, which some of them are pretty old. Some of them were like a doll for the grandmother of the child that actually enchanted her. And yeah, it can get a bit dark, but it's never explicit. It's clean fantasy at the end of the day. And everything is told through that allegory. So sometimes I think that a younger audience will enjoy it as well, but an adult audience may pick up between the lines to see what's happening. And what I can say is that the ending is, yeah, being what it is, it's a rewarding ending.
I will say something like I love the layers that you put into your
Oh,
writing. So
thank
I've had
you.
the pleasure of reading Dance with Me and also the Genesis of Change, and we'll talk about that one a little bit later.
Yeah.
But it's so wonderfully structured and layered that I think whatever style of read you're looking for, you can take something away from Dance with Me, whether
Oh,
that's
thank
just
you.
pure enjoyment level or whether that's someone who may have also had similar experiences can take something away and feel like they've been seen, which I think is such a powerful, powerful thing to do. And in 140 pages or however short it was, I know I've spoken about Genesis of Change a couple of times on my channel, but I said that is around 100 pages and it took me 3 days because of how
Yeah.
deep and layered it was. I needed to really think about the structure, and Dance with Me was no different. It took me about 3 days to read slightly more pages than Genesis of Change, but because it invites the reader to really sit with those thoughts and those emotions and to think about how they may have played a part in their own lives. So I think that's really, really powerful. You've got a wonderful story there, and I hope lots of people go and pick it up. Also, the
Yeah.
Kickstarter is down below
Thank you.
in the description box, so feel free to go ahead and check that one out. Hello, Esme. Thank you for joining
Hi,
us.
Esme.
Good morning to you. Another champion of Dance
In
with Me,
this,
which is
yeah.
great. Yeah.
But yeah,
Um,
really, thank you, Kris, for what you said. You are very, very kind, and I'm really honored. And you
you're,
left me without words, actually.
I mean, you're the author of the book, so I just read it. So this started off as an interactive story, which is quite
Yeah,
interesting, and this was over on the Unearthed Stories
Nerd
series. So
stories,
yeah, can you tell us a
which
little
I
bit about
have
how
here.
perfect? How do they work? How does the interactive stories work?
Yeah, so in particular in dance, these are basically just, let's just say, like a Kindle, like an ebook that you will have, except that every few paragraphs you will have to choose where the story goes. And in the case of dance, So let me see if I can show you how it works. So you will always have like a few paragraphs of text, and every that, then
Oh,
you
I
will have a
see.
choice,
Yeah.
and then you have to just swipe the choice, and the text continues. And those choices can be different things, right? So it can be about moving the character from one place or to another. It can be about responding. It can be about thinking. And in the case of Dance With Me in particular, I used that mechanic originally to try to frustrate the reader because I wanted them to feel what Lyra feels, right? Um, if you look at it this way, interactive fiction is a different medium, right? So a reader doesn't go to it just expecting to read. That's a default engagement that you will have on a book, right? When you are playing interactive, they are expecting to have agency, right? Over the story, and to some extent, because you can't have full agency, right? You have to limit it, otherwise it will go, yeah, you will have a scope creep. But in the case of Dance With Me, and given that the doll is locked in a cabinet, within the music box, and she's also depressed and refusing to have some specific thoughts because of the abuse and the emotional abuse she's going through, I will give you a choice. And then when you take it, I will just strike the text through and do something else, because that's a true denial, that you may be on a very difficult situation, logically what's happening, but you refuse to acknowledge it because it's easier, right? So in the interactive story, I had the opportunity to actually frustrate the reader in that way. And I remember that we had some beta readers at the start that they told me that it was actually quite frustrating to have that. And I was just like, that's the point. I want them to experience what it is, So having to novelize that, it was quite an experience. That's how we ended up, in the text on the novel. You have, in some cases, several thoughts, and then you have more negative thoughts that are strike through, and you have a single line in the text. So the paragraph is just a single sentence as well, because I couldn't use the interactivity, but in this case, I just use the sentence structure to try to convey the same. That's the sole focus for her point of view in there. But in other stories, you have different things. Like you may have, for example, different pathways. You go left or right, or you have dialogue or other things. Yeah.
It's such a fascinating way of storytelling, like you said, give agency to the reader and put that choice in the reader's pathway to say, all right, what would you do in this situation? It's almost like a challenge.
Yeah.
Like how would you deal with this? And then you don't get a you're right or you're wrong. You get the continuation of this person's story, of Lyra's story. So that is wild to me. Like I remember, when I was reading as a child, there were some books that you would do. They would be adventures. It would be choose which action you're taking or which path you're taking.
Yeah.
But to read that and to be challenged with that as an adult, I can imagine would be almost like a form of therapy. Like, why have I chosen this direction to
Yeah.
go in?
So there is another one, this one, mean. That is this one here. That's actually on the series of Records of the Order. So for Genesis, it happens 5 years after Genesis. And there is a part in which you literally, as a main character, have to choose who to kill. So I
What
will
a
have, there are
conundrum.
two ways. So there are two cases in which the main character says, on the first case, they will say, I need information. I can go A or B or random, the first one that happens there. And in the second one, which is a bit more harrowing, so on the first one, you basically have to do it, but it shows you how one of these eldritch beings will kill a person. And in the second, on the following chapter, you basically have the choice of, you really need information again. You can kill this person, get the information, or you can not do it. And it turns out that the person to kill is a child, an 8 years old child. So it's
Oh
a very
man,
grim and dark
I
story.
can I can imagine
And
people walking away from that being like, "What have I done?"
it's a point, because there is, and that story in particular, Genesis and Records that you read, it plays a lot on morality, and on whether something is suitable for the moment, what's a greater good, why will you do it, and so on. And in Mean in particular, the choice is not so reckless. It's more about like, do you kill this single person to get information that could potentially save an entire country, or do you just risk it? because that person kills a child. So that's a moral conundrum, and it's also what the character experiences. And of course, you may take that choice, but that's not a minor choice. And so several chapters afterwards, you may get the consequences of that. And it can have a lot of impact.
I see why your reads are very philosophical and deep, and you want to make people think because of the consequences that happen there. So let's go back to Dance with Me. Your writing
Yeah.
it's beautiful and it's very
Oh,
thematic
thank
across
you.
the stories that you have. What makes Dance with Me important to you personally?
So, the allegory that I was mentioning before, that actually came because of how I felt. I am a very imaginative and visual person. Sometimes when I feel, I will just imagine like a cinematic to explain my feelings. And one day I was in a very bad place, and this was on yeah, I think it was end of 2021 or around there. I felt like a teacup that had been left to fall to the ground had cracked, and somebody had glued it together, and I had to keep going, glued in and leaking, tea all over the place. And I went to work, and when I came back, that whole allegory had morphed into being a ceramic doll within a music box. And I had chosen that because it always, yes, they are beautiful, but they are also extremely limited. They can only dance in circles in the music box. And I also felt trapped. And so that's the allegory that I played. I originally wrote it as a short story. That was it happened. If since you read the book, the short story was mostly around the ending, so it was like roughly the end
Yeah.
chapter. And when my partner offered me to do unearthed stories, and we started writing it and preparing everything for it, I chose a short story, but I decided to do the whole thing since the doll's birth, you could say, which is when she gets enchanted and comes to life towards the end, because I wanted to show the journey. I wanted to show everything that happens and how innocence can be shattered in a very cruel form because of the decisions of others, and how, in particular, the elven boy is completely oblivious to what he does. Like, he doesn't care at any point about the consequences of his actions and how it affects Lyra. And yeah, that's how the original story came in. And as you mentioned before, I added a lot of smaller details simply because I wanted to keep building into the metaphor. I love books that when you finish reading them and pick them up, perhaps years later, you see new layers to it. And so I added some details that perhaps are not things that you will see on the first play in the first run, like for example, how Lyra treats the first sisters. There are two characters that are sisters that she meets on the first chapter, and she's quite mean towards them. But she's mean because she doesn't know any better. Her life until that point has been perfect, right? And she doesn't understand suffering, and so she's mean. But then towards the end of the book, you can see that changed. She actually regrets how she felt towards the sister. She starts having second thoughts. But in the reread, knowing how everything ends, that first thought is not perhaps shocking, or perhaps the reader doesn't feel annoyed by Lyra's reaction, but perhaps you can see that it is just because she was innocent. And there are also details like the fact that she's ceramic and the replacement doll that is brought is porcelain, because that's a higher quality. And yeah, there are a lot of things that I basically build up as allegories of what I felt. And that's why the book is so important to me, because it helped me heal.
That's so beautiful. I think like the layers of that, it really shows how complex we are as human beings, and that one emotion and sometimes saying, I don't feel great, it's so hard to explain. And being
Yeah.
able to express that in a creative way is often quite powerful. And I think that's why, we say if you can, write it down. Write down what you're feeling. Just see what happens,
Yeah.
because it's so much more complex than what maybe you're just saying. I don't feel good today. Why? I don't know. There's too many layers. There's too many layers to that, and being able to do that and create such a piece of art from it is stunning.
Oh, thank you. And there is also, I think that it's also a very important theme to discuss, like how we are and how we treat people. But sometimes if we are too overt when we discuss these things, people can get on the defensive, you know,
Yeah,
and
100%.
instead of actually trying to listen. And that's why I like allegory so much in my writing, because you're just reading about dolls that get fractured in this case. And the
Yeah, I think
meaning may arrive later,
yeah, and
It's
later, and it was
extra.
interesting that particularly around those sisters, because I don't know whether it was in the author's note or it was something that I read after the fact that explained a little bit why she treated
Yeah, the
them that
author
way. It was
notes.
the author's note. This is why I advocate to read your author's notes every time. Like if you want to find deeper meaning in the books or think sometimes you might think something different than the author intended and that will come out in an author note. And I was like, all right, makes sense now. So, that was amazing. I definitely like the philosopher. I don't want to give too much away, but there was
So,
a few
yeah.
different, yeah, a few different interactions that Lyra had throughout the book, and something that I really enjoyed there. Again, I don't want to give spoilers away for people who haven't read it, but is how it
This one?
takes a village. Yeah, I loved him so much. Um, how it often takes a village. So people say it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can take a village to make someone see their self-worth again, and hearing that repeatedly. And that's something that I took away from the book, having had past experiences as well. It was quite a reflective work for me. And going, you know what? I did have many, many people in my life throughout
Yeah.
my experience that just never gave up, and how important that was throughout the story. And you get to see Lyra build these layers and be somewhat defensive herself as she goes through each of the characters. And I just thought it was wonderful. I'm a
Oh,
big
thank
fan,
you.
if you can't tell.
Yeah, thank you. Something that I wanted to do with this one is the fact that when you're a child and when you are taking into model figures, they may not necessarily be your parents, right? Because in this book, because you have that allegory of the elven boy and the doll that he animates, which is Lyra, I have had beta readers reading that as a parents-child relationship, as a lovers relationship, or as a business relationship, boss and employee. And at the end of the day, she literally comes to life on the first paragraph. And so she doesn't have parents. She takes some idea of the world and how that works. And if it weren't because of that village that actually helps her, she will be on a very different situation by the end of the book, you know? And I think that also speaks a lot about the power of gestures. And that's also what I wanted to do with the characters, because we have one character which only hugs her, but that hug is so motherly and so powerful for her that it gives her um, everything that she was missing at that point, because at the end of the day, in those difficult situations, every gesture matters. If one of those characters have come in and be extremely negative towards her, she could have spiraled into a completely different direction.
It's fascinating because everything that happens every day builds us into who we are.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter how small it is. It can be, like you said, the smallest thing. It can be a big thing, but it creates the human that we are moving forward from that point. Um,
Yeah.
so I do want to ask you, because it is such a reflective story, what is it that you hope your readers will take away from Dance with Me?
That's a very difficult question. I will say a lot of things. I would like people, if I can help someone, at least one person, that's amazing. That's a goal, because writing the book actually helped me. And even with the beta readers and the ARC readers, I had a lot of people reaching out and saying, like, this book reached in the precise moment, and that was just like, mission accomplished for me, because that was exactly what I wanted. But if I can also teach someone to be more conscious, not to be like the elven boy, that will also be a win, because at the end of the day, yeah, one day we may be in angry because some reason and we end up being nasty to someone else, we don't know how that person is on that day, you know. And perhaps if we can learn to be a bit more conscious, and if this book shows you the effects of being nice to people, you know, that will be another win as well.
It's lovely. I definitely took quite a lot from it. So, just to shift gears a little bit from Dance With Me, I do want to
Yeah.
talk about Genesis of Change,
Yes.
which is another novella which I really enjoyed, The Tales
It's
of the
also pretty
Alchemist.
small.
It's
Yeah.
it's small, but it packs a punch.
I know.
I'll say it took me 3 days. I think I don't know if I mentioned it live, but off the live, I was like, it took me 3 days to read it. Also, very thematic in a different way, playing with morality, I guess.
And with
For my
identity a
take
lot.
and
Yeah.
identity, yeah. So, how did you choose your themes for this one?
Oh, this one. So it has a lot of reflections. I actually started the series with the interactive that I mentioned with Mean. So I wrote that one first, and let me see if I can show you the cover in a larger format. So it started with that interactive, this one, Mean, and this one was actually a reflection on academia and its chase for knowledge, you know. And the alchemists, I did a lot of talks about the alchemists, and I went down the rabbit hole and rabbit hole of world building. And when I decided to actually make it into a world, I decided to start with the beginning, which is basically how they become alchemists, which is the part that is here. But the key point that I wanted to discuss was the transformation from being a human to being an alchemist and what happens in between. And that's where the idea of identity it comes. It's also it's a very twisted way of explaining a personal experience, in the sense that I realized that the person that I was 10 years ago is no longer there. You know, I'm a completely different person. If you look 20 years ago, that's even a different person, you know. But at the core of all of them, there is always like a core of identity, of values or principles that remain. And that's the core of the alchemists, you know, that they may go through a very big transformation, but they have to discover what they truly are, like the attitudes, the emotions, and the identity that they have, and with that they can transform into something new. And that also comes in because with the new powers or affinities that they want to have. That's one of the sides that I wanted to tackle, but I also wanted to discuss a bit more the stoic idea of a struggle through life, because if you see it in one way, that we are always struggling, right? We are struggling against change because we don't want to change. We want to remain how we are. We are struggling against the decisions other people make that sometimes affect us. We are struggling about to remain as we are, not to change, about the society that remains. So everything is a struggle, right? And that struggle that we go through, which may be huge or it may be pretty relevant and minor, right? But everything that we go through changes us. And that's also the part of the concepts that are here. There are a bit more of ideas like the concept of bias and how that affects our perception and our knowledge, and a lot more. But as you say, it's a very different story as well, because this is told from the point of view of eldritch beings, right, which are not gendered, non-human, and they have a very different morality to us. And so what I wanted to show was also that how will they see the world, right? Do they judge their own actions if they don't have the same morality or the same moral parameters than we? So,
It was
yeah.
fascinating. It's like
Thank
one
you.
of my favorite reads of the last, I don't know, 5 years. I had a great time with it.
Yeah.
Anytime someone asks for a philosophical book recommendation, I'm trying to like throw the Genesis of Change at them.
Thank you.
Say it's this one.
So
Go and read this one, and then
what
go
I
and
can
stare
tell
at a
you is that
wall.
I'm actually writing the first book in the series, so it will
I'm
come
ready.
soon.
I'm ready. Where's the arc form, Livia? I'll sign up now. So you've sort of answered my next question a little bit already, but if there was more you want to draw on different things, maybe where do you draw your inspiration?
Oh, so it's
Would
quite
that be life
varied.
experiences or external?
Yeah, so that's quite varied. So I will say with the interactives in particular, this is my experimental ground. So sometimes I will say like, oh, I want to do this mechanic or I have this allegory and I want to do this type of interaction and I will just do it, right? And that's how I did one story that actually remembers that you read it and changes after you read it, or stories with multiple POVs because I wanted to experiment on how the consequences of the actions of one POV could be reflected on the other POV, which may not be on the same storyline, you know. So that's basically for the interactives. Is I want to experiment with something, I'm gonna do it. I did
A
it,
creative
and I learned.
playground almost.
Yeah, and that's mostly because I'm a very analytic writer, you know. So everything you can see that for given my podcast and my newsletter, Books and Done, but even my own writing, and I analyze it a lot to see what's happening. And when I play writing in those different styles, I'm also trying to understand why I'm getting blocked, why I'm not being blocked, why it's being easier, why it's difficult, and so on. Right. And for the alchemists in particular, what inspires me on this one is like the layers of humanity, right? Because we have these eldritch beings that kind of, one of the points of the alchemy that they have here is the fact that they can look into the darkest sides of humanity, right? They can see into their emotions, they can manipulate them in a way that is not natural, right? So to which extent are they going to take that? You know? And how can I explore that? How can I
That was some
explore
pretty wild
different?
experimentation that happened.
It
Yeah.
wasn't easy to write. Like this one, I had to rewrite it a lot because it also has a very strange setting because the towers, which half of the story
Mhm.
happens there, it's I'm not sure if you have seen the painter MC Escher, but there is a painting from him that is called Relativity, which it's pretty famous. It has stairways going in all directions and people
Ah,
walking up
yes.
and down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's basically the concept of what I wanted to put up here, that there is no space, there is no time because of plot reasons that I can't reveal, but that's a setting, you know. And how I had a character narrating that, but being completely fine with it because he has already lived 20,000 years there. And I had this human coming in that, of course, with a human mind, couldn't understand anything. So trying to put up, you know, the shock of a human compared to the narrator who's just like, okay, this is happening, this is normal. You know, that was
Yeah,
also
I've
quite an
literally seen it all.
experimentation. Yeah, basically. And then for the stories, there are other things. For example, Tales of the Bookshelves. There are more books on this storyline, actually. So in the app, which is also part of the Kickstarter, we have Our Own Rhythm, which is another interactive story in the same universe as Dance With Me. So it follows a different set of dolls. It's a standalone, and it also has a metaphor. In this case, it's about transformation. It's about surviving bullying and the anxiety and the depression that may come after being bullied. It's about hating what you once loved and being unable to do what you once loved because it's now fully associated to that bullying. But it's also told through dolls, you know, and the allegory in there also comes from a very visual side of me that needed to tell that story. So I would say that what inspired me, it's either I want to experiment, I want to complain about something, I want to explore an idea, or I need to heal and write something in a very allegorical way.
Lovely. Um, well, I was going to talk about your writing process as well, and it seems like it's
Yeah.
it's always building. You know, it's always there. How do you choose what to write next? Is it just a feeling, or is there plans? What does your routine look like? Tell us about your writing.
Yeah. So I'm an extreme plotter. I
Okay,
need to
that
have,
was my next
and so
question.
yeah, I'm an extreme plotter, so I need to plot, and I not only plot like from the world building to the dialogue, in some cases even to the body beat level, but I also plan like what I'm going to write, when I'm going to release it, and so on. Because at the end of the day, I have the podcast, I write for the app, and I'm releasing the book series. If I'm don't time myself in a very specific way, I won't make it. You know, so that's something that I have learned to manage time very well. And sometimes it can be frustrating when I don't reach the self-imposed deadlines, but I'm also trying to learn to be a bit kinder. I know that sometimes I can't hit the deadlines, but yeah. And what I have done, like originally I started writing more for the app because that's basically what made me write again, to have the opportunity that my partner, my significant other, gave me to write on the app. And from there, yeah, I did that whole world building on records, and that's a series that I really want to take forward. So that's the one that I have planned the most. I have, so the first, I'm going to give you like news basically. I haven't shared much of this, but I have the first series I'm working on. It's going to be 4 books, and I have 2 more novellas planned, and perhaps 2 more interactives in that story as well, because that's a mix of interactives and books. And yeah, I have the Our Own Rhythm, which is the other standalone in there. I may novelize it, may not. We'll see. And I have another one in there. But basically, sometimes in terms of what I want to write or what I want to experiment. And when we started with the app, after we did the first update we did, it was actually called Cats Take Over, and it was cozy fantasy with a cat protagonist. But after that, I decided to start doing the updates with a theme. So the update that was called Elusive Pathways, it was all about finding pathways. So one story was a dungeon crawler, which is philosophical because I can't take themes away of my writing. It's a metaphor on the journey through life. The dungeon is life, basically. And then you have to find everything. And the other story was about finding your new pathway, where you are, where you go. Then we did from Elusive Pathways, I can't recall which one. Oh, we did Future Societies, which was sci-fi. And I did one that is set up in Australia, actually in Perth. There is one, yeah.
Did you
And
have all the
that's
kangaroos on the side of the road?
no, thank you. I hate the kangaroos on the side. They are a hazard then. So yeah, that's this one. Let me see if I can show you. Static Signal, that's the one that's centered in
No.
Australia. That's a multi POV. And I wanted on that update, which was called Future Societies, I wanted to explore the theme of societies. I wanted to speculate in the sense of it's not ships and fights in the space. Let's just see how society evolves, that side of speculation. So that's why sometimes I just write out of one interest of to explore. That's why I also write speculative fiction, because it's themes that always attract me. But in terms of writing, yeah, to round up the answer, it's mostly like I plan everything or what I want to do there and just try to follow that, unless an exception and a mighty need to write something happens, because that happens sometimes.
Sounds like you have incredible plans. And
Thank you.
we've got the exclusive here over at the channel. So 4 books, 2 interactives, and
Yeah.
potential interactives, and 2 novellas.
Yeah.
These are all plotted.
So I have, yes, to some extent. So I have especially because, the novellas are prequels, so I know the events that have to happen in there. They are not very well detailed plotted to the level that I need to write, but I know exactly, the beginning, the ending, what must happen in there, and that's it. And for the main series, I know exactly where I want to get it. And I don't generally have the problem of the character doesn't want to do what I want, because I plot so much. I generally try to think how that will happen and try to limit it so that it's happening. But I'm going to be honest, like this one, I had to rewrite it twice because what I wanted wasn't working. So that may happen, and
That does happen.
yeah, that happens. And I think it's also part of a process, but it's also what I like. If it's not working, I get frustrated, but then I also get my partner and start just telling him what's not working until I can work it out, and get an idea. And yeah, that's
That's
basically,
great.
I have a third one in this universe planned, but I haven't written it yet because I have the allegory. I'm not quite sure how I can pull off the allegory. So I need to mull over that a bit more.
Is there a sense of perfectionism in there as well? Needs to be.
Yeah, I think so. But it's also the fact that at least Tales of the Bookshelves, because it plays with the idea of dolls being enchanted. That's a baseline, but there is something else happening, right? So it may work in my mind, in my head, but it may not work on paper. And sometimes, for example, the other standalone, the one that I mentioned that is also part of the Kickstarter, so Our Own Rhythm, it was actually, I think, one of the most complex character arcs I have written, simply because what I was trying to pull in was, I'm trying very hard not to spoil, so I'm sorry if I'm vague in there, but what I was trying to spoil is the fact that to tell in that story is the fact that sometimes you may be feeling something, but you really don't understand it. But it's happening anywhere and you are feeling it anyways, right? So this is Tales of a Bookshelves is a first person present tense narration, right? So how can the reader understand what's happening to a character that doesn't understand what's happening to them? So trying to wrestle with that was actually pretty difficult, and I
I
had
can
to,
imagine it's quite complicated to pull
especially because
whatever
it's,
it is.
yeah, especially because it's also linked into the metaphor in the book that there is a transformation for this soul in particular, right? So she begins to transform and change the type of soul, to say, to some extent. And if she doesn't know what's happening, how can I do it? So trying to, give hints to the reader while at the same time trying to make her not realize what's happening, that was also pretty difficult to handle. And with the third one that I'm planning, that's the point where I'm at. I have the idea. I know exactly what I mean by that. I'm not exactly sure how I can pull it off in the text. And so, yeah, I will probably stay slow cooking
For
in
a
my
while. Yeah.
mind for a while
Turn it
until I
on
can get
low
around to
for
it.
8 hours and come back to it.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've answered a few of my other questions, so I'm gonna throw over to plotter or pantser. With being an extreme plotter, is there a point that you get to where you're like, I am now comfortable with starting to physically write this? Is there a point that you go, I plotted
Yeah.
enough, I'm ready to go? What does that look like?
I think it depends on the story as well. Like, for example, the one that I mentioned, Our Own Rhythm, I had the whole story planned, but it's so character focus heavy that I actually plotted in detail until half of the story. And I said, like, I'm going to reach there and then I'm going to see in which state the character is so that I can plot the second half. I knew the ending and the ending didn't change, but I needed to know the emotional development because it's so character centric that I needed that to follow in. And there is only one that I have pants. I woke up on an idea, wrote it in a single week, and it's 12,000 words, so it's not that much. And that's it. And I was just like, I pants one story in my life. Yay! That's it. Never
I
again.
I thought I was a plotter until I wrote. So I like
It
the first couple
depends.
times I tried to write, I plotted and they didn't go anywhere. Then
Yeah, it depends on how you write. I generally plot like an onion. So outer layer first,
yeah,
world building. I know
yeah,
what I want to take the story. So because I write by themes, the theme is generally what comes to me first. Like, this is what I want to discuss in the story, right? And this is a setting that's going to allow me to talk about that topic. These are the characters as well, depending on whether the story is more plot driven, like Genesis, or more character driven, like Dance with Me. And from there, I start like in the different sections, then go to the different chapters, a scene by a scene within the different chapters. And then when I get to write a chapter, sometimes like the outline of the chapter is enough and I can write that in. Sometimes I have thought for that about that particular chapter for 3 months straight. So I just like, yeah, that's it, finished. That's a very rare occurrence, I will
yeah.
say. And in other cases, I have like the critical editor mode on and I can't put a single word in paper. And what I will do is just like, I just write the dialogue. I write the dialogue and between brackets, I will literally put up pause, assessing the other character, or body beat to weight, like in a very crude manner. And once I have all the dialogue and everything done in that crude way, that's the last level of plotting that I will do. And I will go again, like polishing everything and actually having some text, not just markers.
That's something that I really love about alpha reading. So getting into alpha reading where the author doesn't necessarily know what they want in a particular section, and there'll just be a gap or brackets being like, fix this with like nothing in there. Just go back and do something with whatever this is. It's really fun. I can imagine it
Yeah,
would not be so fun if you're writing it, then you have to go back and do
yeah.
it.
And then for the interactives, I generally have to plan the consequences of the actions. Like, what type of choices will I have? Like, if you go somewhere, is that going to impact the knowledge? Is that going? So it's basically plotting 4 times for the same story, right? For example, me, the one that I mentioned on records, it has two big paths, and each path divides into two. And because it is a political intrigue fantasy, I literally had to just, I kept track on a document for every path, like which choices you have, which knowledge will give you, what the other characters knew or reacted. And with that, I was like trying to force it, so I think that plotting the interactives it's very difficult because of the variability as well.
Yeah, it's I can imagine. I like I said, I was a plotter until I wasn't, and then all of a sudden, the only time I've successfully written a book, hopefully, knock on wood, comes out this year, pants the whole thing. I don't know if it's any good, but we'll see. We'll see when it comes out.
I
So
think it
this
depends
isn't.
of each one. I think it depends of each writer. It's not a matter of one method. It's
Yeah,
better than
100%.
another. Yeah,
You just find what works for you, and that's so true of any
yeah,
aspect of life. Whatever works for you may not work for the other person. You can give advice, but at the end of the day,
exactly.
that person is going to find what works for them. Um, Now, I didn't have this question in here, so it shouldn't be too much of a curveball, but I'm curious as to your inspirations, like your favorite authors that you gravitate towards, because you're such a thematic writer yourself. Is there anyone that you go, that's my favorite author? That's who I pull from.
Hmm. I generally try to discover as many as I can, but what will constitute a favorite author is somebody who has lyrical prose or that at least does uses literary elements like playing with sentence structure or grammar or specific words in there. I'm going to give you examples after. And also where the theme is central to the story. I generally don't care about the characters or the plot as long as it has a good theme. And something like when I started reading the sci-fi masterworks, which are a literal box of chocolates, some are very old with all the problems that implies, and some are amazing. And
I've
when
got
I
a few on
started reading those,
myself ready to go.
yep. When I started with those, I learned to be a bit more curious about the author intention. So sometimes I will just let the book surprise me. Like, for example, I have Annihilation in there, and I finished it. That's Jeff Vandermeer. I finished it, I think, 2 weeks ago. And when I was reading it, I started the book and I was saying, like, what's the theme of this book? What's the allegory? And I was like, there's a problem here. But the prose is so beautiful, and he was doing like some very specific things that made me realize that it was completely intended. Like the character was having some very blatant contradictions in there that I was like, this has to be intended because it's very obvious. And when I reached the end, I was just like, I love this book. And I actually found the meaning of it and everything else. So yeah, some authors that I can tell you that one I really loved it, but it's the only Vandermeer book that I have read. I really like Dune, which I have like all the pretty books in there, and I know that everybody focuses more a bit more in the nobility and the warring and all of that. I really like the discussion on the messiahs that it has, and in beliefs and how beliefs shape society as a whole. I think that's a very important concept in Dune. Um, I also like 1984. I have read almost anything Orwell, basically. And yeah, other one of my favorite books that I will say thematically, it's Flowers for Algernon. I read it with a box of tissue papers in there because I thought it was amazing. And especially because it relies on a trope that nowadays it's not very well respected, but he's actually using the trope to discuss, to make a discussion on the fact that intelligence doesn't equate to value, that we are valuable regardless of our intelligence. And I think it's an incredible book. So yeah, that's a type of books that I generally look for, things that are playing on literary elements, heavily thematic, and that make me discover something unique. The more unique or different the book is, the more prone that I'm going to be to like it, you know?
It's funny. You mentioned Annihilation. I was actually going to ask you when we got off the live what that book was, because I love that cover. I think it's the 10th year anniversary cover, and I just read
Yeah.
I just read Absolution, the fourth book. This cover is beautiful. It is
Yeah,
so
it's beautiful.
lovely.
And I actually want to get into authority. This was actually, let me show you. It has like,
The
yeah.
foiling on it, it's so
Yeah, the
lovely.
foiling, it's amazing.
Um,
And it also has a printing inside. So inside the
I didn't
cover.
know that. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful book. It was funny because I wanted the clumsy pink cover for this one.
Mhm. Oh
And
yeah, yeah.
I couldn't
Person.
find it, and then I found that one, and it's pretty related to what happens on the book. So the board that you have in there is related to the book. But yeah, those are the ones that I like. I think one you may like in particular is Walking on Glass by Ian Banks. That was recommended to me, and I ended
I
up
meaning
loving
to
that
read
book.
Ian Banks for a
Yeah.
while. Yeah,
So
I haven't picked up yet.
Iron Banks, you have to be careful. The one that has Iron M Banks, that's his sci-fi pen name. Iron Banks is a literary fiction pen name.
Okay,
So
all right.
those are, but yeah,
Cool. Well, thank you. That was a wild card question at the end there.
yeah,
I as a fun aside, my friend and I read the trilogy, the Southern Reach trilogy, and Authority is a little bit different.
yeah.
It's probably the most linear of the three of them. And then as a buddy read, we read Absolution, which is the fourth one that
The third
he's
one, yeah, the last
released
one.
last year, last November. And we tweeted, we had a discussion on it, and we tweeted being like, I don't know if this answers any questions, but it was cool. And then he retweeted and said, no, it does answer the questions. You need to read deeper, or something like that. We're like, oh, we're famous now. Jeff Vandermeer has told us all, which was a lot of fun. But I love it. Like I don't know if it's sadistic, but I love coming away from books like that just confused, like
Yeah.
having no idea what's going. But I love movies like that as well. Like I like art house cinema where you come away from and you're like, I have no idea what happened to me, but I really
So
enjoyed it.
one of the movies like that from the last year is Tenet. I think I
I
love
haven't
it.
watched it.
Hyper confusing, love it, and you have to just watch it a few times, think through it, and I'm. I think that's also so. Every type of we need generally every type of book. Cozy fantasy is okay, you know. To each their own, and we can all read
Mm,
what they want. But my heart just leans towards themes and weird stuff
yeah.
and strange prose, you know. And yeah, that's what I like to read.
Yeah, I definitely like experimentation, and because I'm a visual reader, I don't know if you're a visual reader as well, but people playing with imagery and in ways that your brain can put together is also a lot of fun, um, for me
Yeah,
personally.
and
But yeah,
Annihilation has a lot of that on
well, yes,
playing with
so
the
much of that.
imagery and like what are you describing? You know,
Yeah,
the
writing on the
the one
wall.
that you may like, if given that it plays on imagery quite a bit, is A Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick. It's not a read that I would recommend to everybody. So the point is for you to be lost in meandering conversations, because the meandering conversations have a point in the book, but it can be a bit difficult to read because of that. You know, so it's like you
I
have
love
to
that
be
stuff though.
patient that there is a meaning to it. You know.
You've got to sit with it. You've got to like
Yeah,
get there.
and
And,
actually, that book has a very sad author notes. Like it's a very important book for him as well, for
mm,
the author. So after you read the whole book, if you read the author notes, it gives you like a whole different perspective into what just happened. Yeah.
okay, I'll get the books off you once I close the live. I need to write them down so I don't forget them, because I love your writing. So I'm like, if you like them, chances are I
Thank
probably
you.
will enjoy them. So before we do sign off for the evening, Livia, can you please tell us what some of the stretch goals we can see in your Kickstarter are?
Oh
What can we
yeah.
look forward to
So
packet?
we already did 4 stretch goals. We are going into the 5th one. The 5th one will be an insert for the hardback. So it's going to have a letter from the character that you actually liked, Solo,
Mhm.
to
Love.
another character in the story, which is set in the past. So it's yeah, short story standalone. That's one of the stretch goals. The next stretch goal after that, it's the response to the letter, also as an insert, and it will be printed, like a vintage letter and all of that. And the last stretch goal, it's possibly making this a deluxe edition with everything golden, actually gilded with gilded edges and everything else. So, and it will have the gilded even in the inside, which is a graphite made hardcover. So yeah, those are the ones that we have left, and we are somewhat close to number 5, which is the first insert. So I'm hoping that we can get there before it finishes.
How long do we have to go? It's about 2 weeks, 6th of
Yeah,
June.
so in Australian time, it finishes on the 7th at noon. Yeah.
So you
And
heard
then
it
after
here.
that, yeah. And then after that, we will have late pledges for 2
Mhm.
more weeks, but the late pledges are going to be a bit more expensive. So if you
You heard it.
can, you
You heard
rather
it,
do it now.
team. Hey, Faye, welcome in. So you heard it here. You need to go and back it now in the link down below to make sure that you get the pledges in before June. Let's say June 7th in Australia, which would be June 6th for
6th and everyone,
yeah
everyone else.
everyone
Yeah.
else. Yeah.
And
Um,
something else is that you can get the book signed and numbered, or signed, numbered, and dedicated, depending on the pledge as well. So that's also
have you been
something nice.
practicing with like your wrist? You see these like mass stacks of books that authors get from Kickstarters, and you've got to sign them all. You
I
need
have seen
your
them.
partner, the Brandon Sanderson team. If you've seen him sign books
I have
before,
seen those videos from Sanderson. They are amazing.
partners there.
Insane.
Moving the book so you can sign them all. That'd be fantastic. Before we do sign off, though, was there anything else you'd like to add to the audience, or anything you'd like to talk about to do with Dance with Me or the Kickstarter or anything?
Yeah, sure. So we have quite a few things in there. The Kickstarter has a hardback, the audiobook, which is already recorded, and we also have the paperback. And I have shown that in Instagram a bit, but the internal design is different on both of them. So you can get them there, and you can also get access to our own rhythm, which is other standalone in that universe in there. And yeah, we also did my partner did an amazing trailer for it, which you can find in one of the updates. And that was made in Unreal Engine. It was amazing. And yeah, that's for now. And as I said before, it finishes on June 7th, noon for Australia, June 6th, midnight for everybody else. And there will be late purchase afterwards, but there aren't many left. So it's going to be a bit more expensive. And there are also some weird rewards, like some rewards have earrings. Like I will make
That's cool.
polymer clay earrings, and there is another pledge which is a bit expensive, but I will write an interactive story with your cat or dog as a protagonist. So there are some things in there if somebody wants to try them as well.
That's amazing. I'm trying to think of my dog as a protagonist. She was an escape artist when she was younger, so that could be fun.
The idea came in because I wrote Herald, which is a cozy fantasy, and the cat spy is based on my cat, and most of the mischief that the cat does in there is actually my things that my cat actually did. So it was pretty fun writing it. Yeah, but yeah, those are short stories.
I wholeheartedly agree. Anytime
Yeah.
animal protagonist would be
That's
amazing.
a tier number 7th. So, and of course, it will be just an interactive. There are only 4 slots for that one because I can't write that much either.
We've got to plot them out too. We've learnt that you're a
Yes.
massive plotter, so they've got to be all plotted out. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was lovely to have you on here. It's lovely to also dust off my interviewing. Haven't done one in a while. But thank you so much for joining me and celebrating Dance with Me. And for anyone
you.
who is listening or watching the replay, then go ahead and check the link down below. You'll have Livia's website, Livia J. Elliot, across all social media. Is that correct?
Yes. So I'm Livia J. Elliot on Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, and my podcast, Books Undone. You can find it anywhere where podcasts are, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and yeah, it's on YouTube. You can find it as Books Undone. I have a channel at Livia J. Elliot, and I also collect all the interviews and everything in there, so you can also use it as a platform. My website, liviajelliot.com. And my newsletter, which is mostly literary analysis and writing advice, is on liviajelliot.substack.com. And you can subscribe there as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I'll put all those links down below as well if you do want to go and check Livia out across the board. But yeah, and also the Kickstarter. Go ahead and pledge, because that is down below as well. All right.
Please.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the audience.
Thank you so much for inviting
The
me.
next one. No problem. Ciao.